Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of our third International Social Prescribing Network Conference. And I know some of you will be joining us today for the first time. Some of you are back for a repeat performance. And didn't we have a great day yesterday? I have to say, I felt really satisfied. The networking worked, lots of people were buzzing. I could see lots of exchanges of ideas and lots of people answering each other in the questions and sharing information. And that's what it's about. It's about connecting and being part of the family. And if you're new to this family, then welcome. So today is the collaborative leadership session. I'm really looking forward to this. These are messages that we really need to hear. We have to say really sorry that Bev Taylor's not with us this morning. She's had really bad Wi-Fi problems beyond her control. So I'm going to be wingman for Sam today, as he wingman for me yesterday. I want to start by reading one of the poems that our poet in residence, Harula, has written for us. She wrote 9 yesterday, and they came through last night, and I read them, and I thought, gosh, I can tell what session you're in, Harula. So here's a short one, and it goes back to something Sam and Emma were talking about yesterday, that sometimes it's not the medicine that we need, and it's called What's in Your Emergency Kit? Plasters, bandages, antiseptic. Sometimes first aid kits don't get it. There is no blood, no risk of infection, but clouds are gathering. I'm losing direction. Grab your favourite chocolates and an uplifting tune, perhaps a poem that helps create room. In head and heart, in body and breath. Take a moment. Thanks, Harula, that's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the ones that we get today, and we put a tab on the conference platform now for the poems so we can publish them. So thanks, Vicky, for doing that. Sam, I'm going to hand over to you so that you can just tell us how we're doing this session. So over to you, Sam.
So we have 4 amazing speakers, which we're gonna take straight after each other. So Ian, James, Nick and Andy, who are leaders in social prescribing, are passionate about social prescribing, know an enormous amount about what's going on in the country and around the world, but most of all are passionate about bottom up. Always when I find I'm talking to them, they always use the word, how can I help you? So let's go into these 4 presentations. But while these presentations are happening, can you please think about the questions you want to be asked? Because we'll have about 25 minutes for questions afterwards. So please put things in the Q&A, and so that we're ready to go straight in with all 4 of them with the questions. So without more ado, can we start with Ian's presentation?
Hi everybody, welcome. I'm delighted to be invited to join you this morning. I'm Ian and I'm Policy Manager at Alzheimer Society, where my work specialises in issues around personalisation and integration of health and social care, where it affects people with dementia. But I'm also the Hi everybody, welcome. I'm delighted to be invited to join you this morning. I'm Ian and I'm Policy Manager at Alzheimer Society, where my work specialises in issues around personalisation and integration of health and social care, where it affects people with dementia. But I'm also the co-founder of Dementia Change Action Network, or the DCAN as it's more widely known. And this is an open network where we work across systems collaboratively to personalise dementia care and support. And it's this work really I've been asked to share some of the reflections and things that we've learned about the nature of collaboration and I guess of leadership too. We have about 5.5 minutes. So this will be very much a quick dip rather than a deep dive into the topics and themes and challenges that we've encountered. And I'm sure you have faced as well in your work. But I hope it will spark some ideas and some questions that we were able to pick up later in the panel discussions that follow. So DCAN itself as a network started very small, a sketch in my pad, But then it became a conversation between two people, and then through further conversations and bringing more people in, the start of a much bigger plan. The other person involved at this early stage was Gemma Clifford, who's senior manager within NHS England's personalised care group. And she, like me, came to the conclusion very early on, probably the first or second time that we met, that we both wanted to achieve the same goals, and that if we wanted the same outcomes, then it made a whole lot more sense to be doing that and pursuing that together rather than collectively, rather than individually. So we joined forces as individuals and people, but also as representatives of the two organisations we worked for, which I think has been key too. And we set then about enlisting the support of others who we felt could help us succeed in our bigger plans. So we're now a network of over 350 people, encompassing those with dementia, their partners and families, alongside people in professional roles within health, social care, as well as the voluntary community and social enterprise sectors, both large and small organisations, as well as academics and researchers too, bringing their own insights and expertise. So a diverse bunch, and its diversity gives us real strength, but we're all bound together by a common pursuit, and that's supporting people with dementia achieve what matters to them in their lives through the personalisation of care and support, and particularly NHS comprehensive model. Our approach within DCAN is simple. It's to create space, and that's space to bring different perspectives together, space to use conversation and collaboration techniques, to spark new ideas, fresh thinking, and then spur people into positive action around personalised care as collaboratively as possible. Our work's organised between 4 themed inquiries, where we bring in evidence, data, research, seek stories, innovations and ideas from wherever we can find them, including internationally. We hold events, discussion groups, we run projects and share resources that help all of us individually in our work and our everyday lives, and then collectively make progress together. One of our themed inquiries is called Social Prescribing 360, and I'm very happy to answer questions either in the panel discussions later or outside of this event if anyone wants to contact me in the DCAN about the role of collaborative leadership and how it must play a vital part in social prescribing work. And specifically, our interest within the DCAN and social prescribing is understanding how we boost awareness and desire and interest in social prescribing amongst people with dementia. Then to look at how we can make sure there's skilled and inclusive support available through link worker services. And finally, and crucially, the availability and sustainable supply of diverse opportunities for people with dementia in the places where they live, with people they want to connect to, doing activities that matter to them. And collaborative leadership is absolutely vital for achieving all of those things. Apologies, you can hear my dog in the background. One of the top lessons I think that we need to learn or have learned, which I hope will be of use to you today and in your work, is that no one of us knows more than all of us, and that collaboration is absolutely key and vital. That collaboration requires a special type of leadership to be successful. It's a leadership of owning what you don't know and can't do alone. It's of giving up power voluntarily, particularly if you're in a large organisation, in the interests of shared learning and achieving common goals. It's a leadership of saying we don't know all the answers or don't even know all the right questions to be asking, and it's the leadership of wanting to therefore listen, hear and learn from everybody equally. It's important to be intentional about this at all times, we found. Think of who is in the room or on the Zoom, who aren't you hearing from at any particular moment, and make sure you have a plan to then connect and include them in future. Second key learning, I think, and connected to the first point, is the importance of being flexible. So being willing to mix things up, give people different options and ways to take part. Personalise this as much as possible, but if the size of an event makes that difficult, be mindful of making sure you've thought of different ways to include people. Virtual platforms, like Teams or Zoom, forced on us by COVID-19 in many cases, have actually proved really positive, and people have found it being a great leveller and has actually broadened participation and inclusion in our work. But they aren't accessible to everyone, and that's really important to bear in mind. Often it's the people it's most crucial to hear from, those most excluded, who find those channels difficult to access. So use other channels, use people channels, use word of mouth, make sure there's paper options as well as online options to feed in thoughts and ideas. And don't forget the value of conversation or the phone call either. We've also been more creative and tried to incorporate song and poems too. these can be very much the best medium to convey how someone feels on a topic, particularly for people with dementia, or who find other ways of feeding in difficult. Finally, don't let progress be the slave of perfection. Have a plan, but don't try to control it too tightly, or you'll wind up squeezing the air out of the creative spaces that we're trying to create. Within DCAN, we aim to be a choreographer rather than the hero of the story that we're trying to tell. But that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and certainly not an easy thing to plan for. And knowing when to bring people in at the right time, who to connect to and with, or where the opportunities are at any given moment is often an innate sense that is often difficult to plan for fully in advance. So if the last year has taught us anything, I think it's this, and learning how to adapt and change while staying true to a vision that you've set yourself in a very authentic sense is an essential element of collaborative leadership. The personalised care requires that DCAN tries to personify, but certainly what social prescribing will require in the future to succeed. Look forward to joining you all in the conversations and discussions to follow, and do keep in touch. Okay, thank you.
You're just on mute there, Sam.
Sorry, Ian, that was absolutely fantastic. That was like a TED talk on leadership. Spark new ideas, give up power, admit you don't know all the answers, plan but don't control too much. I would just love you to be my doctor or carer. Can we go to James?
Hello, I'm James Sanderson, Chief Executive of the National Academy for Social Prescribing and Director of Personalised Care for NHS England and Improvement. So I'm going to talk about collaborative leadership, but I wanted to set that in the context of social prescribing and how we've got to where we've got to now in England. So social prescribing from the very beginning has all been about collaboration. It started as a social movement. Many GPs were leading their own versions of social prescribing for quite a number of years. We've heard from Sir Sam Everington, who led pioneering approaches to social prescribing in Bromley by Bow, and Michael Dixon, who is chairing the conference in Columpton in Devon, was delivering social prescribing services many years ago. So there's been a huge amount of collaboration right from the very beginning, a movement across communities, across general practice. And actually, you know, the network, the social prescribing network, is a huge example of the power of bringing people together to develop a movement to bring about change. And I think social prescribing represents a huge opportunity for a revolution in health and well-being. It creates the circumstances for us to change the way in which we deliver care and support to individuals, and how we deliver change in the way that individuals are connected to their own care. Personalised care is all about ensuring that people are treated as an individual, and that care and support can be built around what matters to them the most. And this is probably the most important bit of collaborative leadership, is actually recognising the expertise of the individual and the skills, knowledge, confidence and assets that they bring to their own care. Because whilst clinicians will always be experts in conditions or diseases, people are experts in themselves, and we need to harness the skills that people bring to their own care. So the first part of collaborative leadership for me is the way in which the system, the healthcare system, collaborates with individuals and puts individuals in a way that their status is respected, their knowledge is respected, and gives them the power to take control of their lives. The second bit of collaboration is the recognition that actually what we're seeing social prescribing really impacting on is issues that cut across the whole of society. At least 1 in 5 GP visits are purely for a non-medical need, and people are going to see their GP because there's an issue with relationships or housing or debt or social isolation and loneliness. Now, these issues aren't just the preserve of the healthcare system. They're issues that permeate across the whole of society. So that needs collaborative leadership at various levels. It needs collaborations at a national level. It needs government to work across multiple departments and agencies, and we see that happening so wonderfully over here in relation to government collaboration. We see that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and the Department for Environment and the Department for Health are all collaborating on approaches to social prescribing. Social prescribing was cited in the government's 25-year environmental plan as one of the components that would really support climate change and environmental policy. It was also been cited in cultural responses like Let's Create, which is the Arts Council England's report in relation to furthering the arts and cultural activities in the country. So we can see that social prescribing requires a significant collaboration at a national level, and also locally. One of the things that we really think is starting to happen, but really can be developed much further, is the collaboration between local organisations, local voluntary sector partners that are delivering activities that people are being connected with to provide them with support. So, you know, the community choir linking up with the lunch club, linking up with a dementia cafe, linking up with a walking football group that all exist in that local area to create the opportunity for collaborations around the needs of the individuals and the communities that those activities are supporting. So we see that collaboration at a national level, at a local level, and also, as I've mentioned, at an individual level. My third area of collaboration is actually the international opportunity. And I think what is really fantastic is that through social prescribing, we now have a truly global programme of activities and a really vibrant global movement, and we see that from the audience today for the conference and the huge interest that there's been internationally in this programme. I've been working for the last few months with a number of organisations within my role as Chief Executive of the National Academy for Social Prescribing to develop a global social prescribing alliance. Working with the World Health Innovations Summit, the World Health Organization, and the UN Global Sustainability Index Institute. We've come together to form a collaboration that will see the development of social prescribing on an international space, and we're looking forward to speaking to people more about the opportunities that can bring. So what I wanted to just say really was that, you know, collaborative leadership happens at all levels. The most important part is starting with the individual, collaborating around what matters to them, looking at the way in which social prescribing is structured across local agencies and national agencies, and also reaching beyond borders so that we can collaborate in a truly global movement. Just to finish off, just a couple of slides just to explain the way in which the work of the National Academy of Social Prescribing fits in. If I have the next slide, please. We launched our plan last year, this time last year, and it's a very, very straightforward plan to build the momentum for social prescribing, making some noise, finding resources, building relationships, maintaining those collaborations that I've spoken about, improving the evidence base and spreading what works. And this is all about how we can really move social prescribing forward and develop it as a core part of the healthcare system in England. And then the second slide just looks at some of the products that we're launching. I've mentioned the Global Alliance, working with key partners. We want to have social prescribing ambassadors. We want an academic collaborative. We want to accelerate innovation and have networks of clinical champions. And through this and through the way in which we work, we can really further social prescribing and also take forward improved opportunities for collaborative leadership. Finally, just to finish off, our Thriving Communities programme, which we're going to be announcing next week, the successful areas that we're going to be supporting through a major grants programme. We've been working with the Arts Council, Sport England, Natural England, Money and Pensions Advisory Service and NHS England to create a Thriving Communities programme, and that I think will demonstrate the way in which social prescribing can continue to really foster collaborative leadership across the system. Thank you very much.
James, thank you so much. What a powerful message of working collaboratively at every single level. And fantastic. Government have always struggled to bring departments together, but your examples of climate change and art, incredibly powerful, or your local examples of community cafes, choirs, walking football groups, incredibly powerful. And one of your strongest messages, I think, is the expertise of individual and reminding clinicians that they're just experts in disease. So a fantastic example of bottom up, top down, a great mix, collaboration with whatever you do, whether it's as an individual locally, within organizations or internationally. And I'm sure people are going to be really interested to hear a bit more about thriving communities in the questions. Thank you so much, James. Over to you, Nicola.
Hello, my name is Nicola Gitsham and I'm the Head of Social Prescribing at NHS England and Improvement. It's fantastic to be with you here today and to get a chance to reflect on collaborative leadership and what this means for social prescribing. So if I can have the next slide. So I guess the first question is, why is this important? And this slide's got some quotes about the benefits of social prescribing from different perspectives. And I think this quote in the top right hand corner really hits home to me. So the quote is, I'm doing things that get me up in the morning. I'm in a better place and I feel positive about the future. And what social prescribing does, as we know, is it tackles those issues, those social determinants of health that actually stop people from feeling that way and being able to have choice of control over their lives and support and live their best lives and feel like they've got a reason for getting up in the morning. And those issues are often loneliness, mental health needs, or complex social issues such as debt, housing, food, relationships that can really get in the way. So they affect people's health and well-being, but they're not just the remit of the health service. The health service is not the only person or the best person to be able to address many of those issues. So I guess the really important reason why we need collaborative leadership is the fact that you need a broad coalition of different agencies to be able to provide that support locally. And you also need communities, ordinary relationships in communities and networks, and the real wealth that communities have to be able to help people live their best lives. So we have to be able to demonstrate and practice collaborative leadership at a local level, really being able to make the most of local assets and the broad range of support that can come from the voluntary sector, local authorities, different statutory organisations, small community groups and faith organisations. And we need to replicate that at all levels in the system, as James said, right from local up to national. So if we can have the next slide, please, Kim. So I think it's really important to me, what do we mean by it? And I think when I think of the leaders in social prescribing field, and it's great that we've got Bev and Sam chairing this session, is they have an ability to be able to set out a story of the future of what could be possible and bring people together around a common purpose and a set of values. They are able to deal with messiness. They're able to keep people safe when it's not clear what the future will be. And they're really good at bringing diverse partnerships together and making sure that people who may not feel so powerful in that partnership have an equal place at the table and an equal contribution, such as people with lived experience or the very small community groups. So this is a really critical skill for a social prescribing link worker and across the system. And if we can have the next slide, I think a really good example of this at the moment is the Green Social Prescribing Programme. So we've got a fantastic opportunity with this DEFRA programme, which is it's bringing a cross-government programme, bringing together lots of partners, NHS England, Natural England, PHE, Sport England, NASP, DHSC, Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and having 7 sites to work with to really test and learn how can green social prescribing improve mental health and change the way we support people who have mental health needs, and how do we spread and scale that across the country. So fantastic opportunity to have these diverse partnerships, and it's been a huge privilege starting to work with those sites as NHS England is providing the support to the sites and bringing the partnerships together, and to be able for those sites to give those messages to government about how we can make this business as usual. So a really good example of this sort of collaborative leadership approach at a local and a national level. So if we can have the next slide, please, Kim. So we're really committed to collaborative leadership. We know the NHS has a huge contribution to bring to social prescribing, and it's fantastic to see the commitments in the long-term plan, but we know we're part of a much bigger picture and a much bigger change that needs to be everybody coming together to address the issues of how do we implement this well so that it stays true to the values. So I think when I think about our materials, this message and the way to implement social prescribing, that's very clear throughout everything we've developed with the reference guide and the welcome pack, and really helping people understand how to build on what's there together already. And I suppose the local shared plans that the reference guide recommends is a really good example of that, but really sort of putting that in and being co-produced with local areas and with the social prescribing community. Next year, we really want to build on that with looking at a maturity framework for ICSs and co-producing that with you and with the with local systems. So if we can have the next slide, please, Kim. And we know that actually being able to deliver social prescribing, you really need people to coach and help you with thinking through how to convene those conversations locally. So we are really fortunate to have some fantastic associates that work with us, many of them helping to deliver this programme over these 2 days. And so what our regional teams do is they really help to convene those conversations at a regional level, bringing all the key partners together and working with NASP and their partners, HEE, public health, voluntary sector organisations, to be able to take that overview of the region, how to work together on sticky issues. They're also able to help local systems develop that joint approach to commissioning and looking at how you can commission social prescribing and social prescribing activities so that you can align statutory funding but make that pot much bigger through corporate and through charitable funding, for example. And then of course our learning coordinators, who play a really key role in helping those link workers to understand their role, be confident as collaborative leaders, really bringing things together for individuals, but also bringing things together in their local communities and acting as a glue between the different agencies and small community groups and faith organisations. So if we can have the next slide, please, Kim. So I joined the social prescribing community in January. I've worked in lots of programmes that need a collaborative leadership approach. The social prescribing community is quite special. So I thought I'd leave you with a fantastic quote from Barack Obama, which for when the times when collaboration can be tricky, and it can be, and it can be many people to collaborate with, it's always important to remember why we're doing it. And this quote, the best education I received was working with people in the community on a grassroots basis, because what it taught me was that ordinary people, when they're working together, can do ordinary things. And so look forward to working with you all, and thank you.
Nicola, thank you so much for that. I loved your sense of dealing with messiness. I think it's incredible. I never thought I'd see the day where NHS England, under your leadership, were doing green social prescribing. How extraordinary is that? You know, did we ever imagine that 5-10 years ago? Absolutely amazing. And I loved your last comment, actually, about the best education is what you get from people when you talk to them. Is fantastic. Thank you so much, Nicola. Right, next, can we go to Andy?
Hello, and thank you to colleagues at the Social Prescribing Network for inviting me to speak here at the conference today. Like all good presentations, I want to start off with describing a burning platform and then finish the presentation by describing a call to action. I've read all the books, and that's what it says to do the right kind of presentation. So let me start off with the easy bit in terms of describing a burning platform. If I start off describing what colleagues will all be acutely aware of, I was going to say we're out of, but I guess we were just coming to the end of perhaps 10 years of austerity within the public sector, 10 years plus. And many of us have had to live with those reducing budgets, those increasing demands, some of those demographic pressures on our systems of an ageing population, multiple comorbidities, and these pressures really do change that balance and create an incredibly challenging environment for us all to work into. The second bit, and the unfortunate part, is we have a new burning platform, again, in terms of the pandemic, and not only the immediate impacts of the pandemic, but the longer term, the legacy impacts of COVID. So I think at the moment we're in that kind of response phase. Lots of people are talking about recovery from COVID, but really I think we need to focus on those legacy impacts, the longer term impacts on health, social care and the wider economy. So that the post-COVID landscape will be significantly different. A number of different dynamics at play there, different demands on our systems, our services, and with that different environment, I believe that's going to require very different leadership, different relationships, different ways of working. So I think it's important for us that we focus on our own organisations, how our organisations can work as part of a much broader system. And for that to really work, we've got to focus on new conversations, new relationships, new behaviours, and we need to really get that right in order to make sure that we as a whole, as a system as a whole, can really provide services and support those individuals within our communities most at need. When you actually distill that down, it becomes a simple case of supply and demand, and that's really what we're dealing with all the time. For me, though, now is the critical time when we can reevaluate that equation. We can relook at the balance of supply and demand, and in order to do that, I think we've got to rethink our approach. We've got to redefine our resources. We've got to reprioritise our objectives and reimagine our opportunities. I'm using the word our there because I'm trying to describe us as a system, as a collective, rather than individuals as a whole. And I think this is a real opportunity, a moment in time when we can redefine what that looks like for the better. So this is a social prescribing conference. And the reason why social prescribing is so important in this context is it ticks so many of those boxes. Social prescribing is genuine community innovation. It's rightly described as that glue between personalisation and population health. It is the manifestation of true collaboration. What it does is it leverages the capacity and capability of the community in its widest sense. And for me, it's absolutely equitable. It resolves those power relationships. It removes the discourse of patient, service user, consumer, and puts everybody on that level playing field. It does increase clinicians' capacity and reduces the need for clinical intervention, and it absolutely speaks to those wider determinants of health. So for me, social prescribing is critical, pulls all this together, and as a social movement, it's just a vital way forward. So why don't you do this? If this is something that exists now, it's something that reduces costs, it increases capacity, it improves outcomes. Why isn't everybody doing it now, never mind thinking about doing it tomorrow? Well, my view is that perhaps we haven't got our relationships quite right. Perhaps we haven't got our language right and the vocabulary right that we use. So my academic background's around social constructionism, and that's demonstrated to me the profound impact that discourse can have, or the misunderstanding can have of our view of the world and our interaction with it. So let me try and paint a picture of that and give you an example. We talk about health and social care, and the constructs of both are really well documented and studied. But let's consider what those differences look like when we compound them across a much broader system, a much broader environment that's made up of the public sector, the private sector, the community and voluntary sector, and all those points in between. When I observe CCG and GP relationships, it's fascinating to me. CCG colleagues speak to GPs in a medicalised language, and perhaps I see GP practices in a slightly different way. I see them more as a business, as an enterprise in themselves, and therefore when I speak to GPs, perhaps I speak in a different language, more akin to that commercial, the business orientated world. So when I talk to them about the advantages of social prescribing, I've often suggested that if I could find a way of giving you back 1 day a week GP consultation time, is that something of interest to you? And of course that whets the appetite spectacularly amongst GP colleagues, because that currency of time is so incredibly valuable to them. So I'm just trying to use that as a small example. It's only a personal observation, but one that I think demonstrates the power of language and the fact that we're trying to get to the same point, but just using those different value sets within a language elicits very, very different responses. So for me, it's about how do we understand the right way to talk to colleagues and organisations that are going to elicit the kind of positive responses that we need. How do we speak to others' agenda, and therefore how do we motivate true collaboration and reciprocity? So what are our roles as individuals and organisations in relation to this agenda? And this is the call to action bit. This is the concluding call to arms. So I speak to you as chief exec from a local authority. I believe that councils have a legitimate mandate as manager of place. I'd probably prefer to call it stewardship of place. And in terms of that stewardship role, looking to the future and how this landscape in which we operate is going to change, then I think that role needs to morph and change accordingly. So I believe that local authorities are that facilitator, that aggregator, working within a system to support that single system approach and try to pull together across that mixed economy of provision. So social prescribing as a function, as a concept, as a social movement, it's so important to realising our collective ambitions across this space. But it's critical that each of us understands what we're talking about, that we use the kind of vocabulary that will speak to people's values, that we work on those relationships, that we understand others' agendas, and then how we can bring our collective resources together for that common purpose. So the challenge, the call to arms for me to you is consider your individual roles, consider the roles of your organisations, and how do we work effectively across this new landscape. Thank you.
Andy, thank you so much for that. So, and incredibly powerful messages, a reminder of the legacy impact of COVID, the need to focus on new relationships, your use of the word our, and the glue between personalisation and population health. Thank you so much. Mari.
Thanks, Sam. So I've been frantically publishing questions. There's been some really interesting discussions raised. I'm not particularly surprised at some of the comments coming through. And the reason I thought it would be really good to have this session is to open up some of these debates, because we can't pretend that everything is rosy in social prescribing, and we can't pretend that it's going to go ahead after a pandemic, after austerity, without funding issues. And we know there have been funding issues. One of the most frequently liked questions, however, which I think we should just tackle head on, is from Jan, who said, I can't help but notice the dominance of white male perspective in leadership roles of the conference for me, which is a real shame. What can be done within our field to address the lack of diversity? So I wondered what James and Andy and Sam and Ian thought about that. Nick, we can come to you next, but since you're not male, I'll leave you out of this one. So if anyone wants to put their hand up, I think it's really good, because I had a conversation with a colleague when I was working at uni, talking about the lack of representation of black leaders. So if someone, and this was in the music industry, and if someone goes in, how do they see themselves progressing if they can't identify with the leadership? And I think we don't want to get into that trap with social prescribing. So floor's open. Who's going to be brave enough to take that one first? James, thank you. We told you we'd save you the simple questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really strong point from Jan. I think, you know, this panel isn't particularly diverse in relation to ethnicity, but obviously what people will have noticed over the course of the last couple of days, this conference has been rich, not just in terms of diversity of the speakers, but in terms of the international context as well. And I actually think that this area of work in the health service is one of the richest, most diverse areas, because it really is reaching down into communities. And what I've seen from social prescribing link workers and from the leadership that is championing social prescribing is that we are really using the opportunity to reflect the communities that we're supporting. And you see that in local areas where the GPs and link workers are really carefully making sure that their service is reflective of the needs of that individual community. So I think through social prescribing we have a great opportunity to change the diversity mix of the leadership within the healthcare system, because I think it's creating huge opportunities for new entrants into a world that perhaps has been dominated unequally for many years.
Brilliant, thank you, James. Does anyone else want to come in on that?
Yeah, Mari, the only thing I'd say is, yes, it's a very real problem. There's a fantastic report done by Roger Klein called The Snowy Peaks, which articulates very clearly the problem. For me, as an East End of London GP, I'm aware of it every day, struggling with the fact that actually the communities that have most suffered from COVID is our Black community, 3 times more likely to die. And the irony of ironies is also the group least likely to have the COVID vaccination. We have a very serious problem in our nation, and COVID has articulated and shown us so clearly actually what we need to do to deal with inequalities and diversity.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to move on to the next question. And another one that got a lot of likes. There's a few that we haven't published through yet, which I will do in a moment. And perhaps, Andy, I'm thinking of you. Oh, it's just flicked away as somebody else has liked another question. Here we go. So, Andy, you're chief exec of a council, and I was struck by how differently you came to this brief that I gave everybody. And I was struck by how differently Ian came to this brief. Because Ian was talking from a community, how do we move forward together? Andy, you had a very different perspective on collaboration. So somebody, I don't know who this is, it says, as social prescribing link workers, we truly see the effects of poverty, poor treatment from services and poor housing on people's physical and mental health. There is only so much we can do for this. It sometimes feels like we're putting a plaster on a gaping wound. How can we integrate with other statutory services beyond the NHS to try to tackle these issues? So I totally agree, and I think link workers have lifted the carpet and they've seen everybody that actually falls through all the cracks of criteria for all the benefits, the services, and that's actually coming to the fore in a big way. But 2 years ago, we were hearing this. So I'm not surprised, I'm saddened. But Andy, what's your take on, what's your advice on how do we make sure that we don't talk about social prescribing just as an NHS thing, because actually they were quite frankly late to the party. It was actually local authorities and community that were going with this first. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks for that. I think it's really quite interesting when you're talking there almost about sovereignty around this. And the important piece that you mentioned there is actually, yes, you've lifted the carpet, you've lifted the lid, you've started to understand where these gaps are and what we're talking about. How I've previously described that from my background, by the way, is within adult services, housing and public health, actually. So I'm kind of acutely aware of some of those issues. And what I've said previously is, what happens if you take the sign off the door? By that I mean, what happens if you take the sign off the door that said social services? And in my view, it deconstructs into its component parts. And those component parts are absolutely what some of the questions are about. They are to do with housing, they're to do with employment, they're to do with lifestyle, they're to do with poverty, they're to do with all sorts of different things that suddenly some bright spark a while ago put them together and said, what you need is a social worker. When actually what I'm saying is we've got to put this, fit this in that broader context. And absolutely part of my role, and I'm lucky enough now in my chief exec role, to be able to challenge those other parts of my organisation and likewise challenge those other organisations across a system to say, what are you doing in relation to this? Whether that's around economic regeneration, employment, housing particularly. So I couldn't agree more that that's what needs to happen. But again, I think it's for all of us to keep challenging that and make sure that we're not seeing this as an individual organisational issue or a particular specified problem. This actually goes right across a number of areas.
Thanks, Andy. Ian, can I come to you? And then Nick, I'm going to come over to you. So I'm just giving Nick pre-warning. I'm going to ask you about the white male dominance. So I'm going to come to you that in a minute. But Ian, just coming back to this, how do we make sure that we bring everyone together? You've been really successful at this. So what are your thoughts?
In terms of the previous question.
Yeah. This, how do we make sure that we don't end up with putting a sticking plaster on a gaping wound and ignore the fact that we're not collaborating?
I think again, it's about being honest and open about what social prescribing isn't, and social prescribing isn't the solution to all of community problems. But what it can do is make best use of what is available to people. It can make those connections. It's a very simple idea, but it's an idea that's open to infinite possibilities. So as a way of shining a light and connecting people and organisations and systems to really focus on the issues within a particular population or community, then I think it has huge power. But it isn't in itself a solution to housing problems and poverty and inequalities. What it can do is release what available assets there are. And I also think we shouldn't underestimate the power of social prescribing and the focus that gives us on those issues, to really expose them for what they are. And if you have political buy-in and NHS buying and local authority buying and charity buying and individuals and populations buy into the principles and ideas of social prescribing and community, then I think there is an opportunity here to really say, actually, yeah, we can do great things. We've all got these great examples, but fundamentally there's some real issues here that need tackling and need to be addressed. So I don't think the issue is with social prescribing. I think the issues lie elsewhere, but I do think that social prescribing can make great inroads, and I think it is a real powerful movement to really draw some attention, some focus and some collective collaborative energy behind trying to fix some of these things.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks very much. And I agree with you. I think that this is a social prescribing actually provides a space where we can legitimately bring people together. But it's about having the equity of voice, isn't it? And it's not saying that the voluntary sector doesn't know as much because they're voluntary sector and health knows best and things like that. There's an equity required, which I've seen grow over the last few years. So Nick, so let's come back to the white male dominance issue, and I wondered what your thoughts were on that, and what it's been like for you as a female leader.
As a female leader, yeah, thank you, Marie. And I'm conscious, we haven't got a lot of diversity on the panel in terms of race and also disability and lots of other sort of areas. But I think the things that are really important is about us all being aware of how we can build a more inclusive and more diverse community that takes social prescribing forwards. And part of that is actually starting the conversation with really understanding what the barriers are. So I think, Andy, you talked about language and really understanding what matters to each of the stakeholders and to each of the different groups of people that we want to bring together in this community. So I think it really starts with building our understanding of what the issues are. And we've all had time where we've had to reflect on that because of COVID and because of Black Lives Matter. And we've really had to think about our own unconscious bias and really
build our awareness and our understanding from different partners in the movement. But I think as a woman, yes, I think there are barriers. There are still barriers. We assume that it's all fine now. I think there's still a lot of way to go. And I think for myself, the things that really matter is finding good role models who actually are part of the movement, having good role models, and coaching. I think we can't underestimate the value of coaching, and that's why within our regional offer, we make sure that coaching and supporting people through how to be leaders for social prescribing, work in collaborative ways, build inclusive communities that take this forward is so important. So I think that's what I would say: coaching, role models, and actually developing all of us that understanding of what it means to be an ally and an allyship. I think they're the things that are really, really key here.
Thanks very much, Nick. Can I just stay with you, Nick? There's a question, a couple of questions came up earlier on. There's some juicy discussion going on the chat, which is great. Where's the younger population in the collaborative models? Where's the voice of the young people and the children and the leaders from that sector in collaboration? And might come back to Andy on that as well, and James, what's happening with young people?
Excellent. So I think, Marie, what we're seeing across the country is the development of social prescribing for children and young people and families. And I would say it's never been more needed than now. What we've seen through COVID is just the impact on young people and children of COVID. Many of us will still have children that are only going back to school next week, and we know that the incidence of mental health needs for children and young people is growing, and that families have been under huge pressure, and as you talked about, Andy, that legacy will continue. So now is the time that we really have to mobilise with making sure that social prescribing has a fantastic offer for children and young people, and we need to do that, as you say, in the involvement of the voice of young people. So we did commission some work from Street Games and from which you were involved in, Marie, as well, and from Spin around how do we get the voice of young people to influence where we go next with social prescribing, and some great case studies coming through. And we're really keen that one of our top priorities at NHS England for 21-22 is to build that sort of work with that coalition and the collaborative around social prescribing for children and young people, develop a toolkit that helps local areas see what good looks like and how to get started, and really start to build that support offer with lots of the partners in this movement. And we need to do that by making sure that the voice of young people, families, and children is part of that. So we're really keen to work with you and others on that as we go forwards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. I'm pleased to hear that children and young people's voices are going to have, more airtime and be able to feed into how things work, because it does work very differently for children and families.
Very differently, yeah.
James, can I come to you? So you and I know that as social prescribing has progressed, that voluntary sector felt left out at times, and often it comes across as an NHS initiative, and there's certainly, I feel like some people are shouting on the chat here that we've been doing this for a long time. I'm just wondering, going forward, so that we have this equitable collaborative feel, how do we go forward to make sure this doesn't come across as just an NHS initiative, and we give the full sort of respect to the community sector? And I know we have, but it's obviously not getting across enough because there's these comments coming across. And I wondered what you thought about that, because you've got NASP, which is looking at a community angle, and you're Director of Personalised Care in NHS England as well. So you've got quite an interesting position there. Can I go over to you with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And been reading some of the comments. I mean, I don't actually see this as an NHS top-down initiative. We worked collaboratively with communities over a number of years to build the comprehensive model for personalised care, and
as you know, Marie and Sam and Michael and others that were involved in the network, this has been a collaborative approach right from the beginning. Social prescribing has come from a social movement. The NHS hasn't invented it behind closed doors. We've worked with communities, we've worked with people with lived experience really extensively. I can't think of many programmes that have been so grounded on authentic co-production with people and communities, working with that lived experience and that wealth of knowledge that exists in the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sectors. So social prescribing and the model isn't an NHS model, it's a collaborative model, it's based on co-production. Whenever I present the comprehensive model for personalised care, which is really complicated, I always say, you know, don't blame me for this, for the complicated nature of this model, because, you know, we've all had a handle in the construction of it. It might feel now that because the NHS is promoting social prescribing and investing significantly into it with the link worker model, that it's a dominant force, but I don't think, again, that is the case. You know, when we were observing the movement, what people were telling us was that it needed investment. It needed the link worker role to be embedded by the NHS to make sure that it was a sustainable feature of the healthcare system, and we've done that. There's always more to do. You know, getting more resources to the voluntary community sector is obviously incredibly important here. And at NASP, we're working really hard to do that, to broker relationships. We've developed a Thriving Communities Fund, which is all about supporting very ultra-local organisations to thrive and create that environment in which social prescribing needs to exist. That really diverse, cultural, supportive environment. There's a session coming up at 11 o'clock. I'll give a plug for that on creative health, and John McMahon will be talking about Thriving Communities programme from the Arts Council perspective, who are one of our partners. You know, I recognise that there are challenges there, and I think, you know, we're only going to get through those by collaborating. This isn't something that is just the NHS's responsibility. You know, we've talked about the issues that people are facing, they're societal issues. There's the NHS working with government, working with local government, working with the voluntary community, faith, social enterprise sectors. You know, these issues that we're looking at tackling aren't just health related, so we need a combined approach.
Thanks, James. Appreciate throwing you know, I think it's really good to have leaders up here to hear and see the comments in the chat, to get a feel for the ground, because you don't always get opportunity to do that. And there's now acknowledgement that people are glad to see that you're acknowledging there's still more to do. Andy, you wanted to come in on that, and we've got a couple of minutes left, so please let's hear from the local authority who's had very good rave reviews on their comments as well.
Thanks. I think it's just really quite a brief point in terms of following on from James's his comments there, that the community and voluntary sector have been doing this for years. The community and voluntary sector are incredibly capable in this field, and what worries me, it's very easy, certainly from a local authority perspective, and I've seen it clearly not in my own authority but elsewhere, where councils have a tendency to wade in with a size 10s into communities and say, it's okay, we understand how to do this better, and let us help you, when actually they're missing the point entirely. It's about actually working with the virtues of that community. They are the experts, and as I say, I've been doing this in a number of different ways for years. There was a really interesting question, I think, earlier on in the session around evaluating the extent of collaboration, and I thought that was a fascinating question. And what would be the value in that? Well, I think the value in that is for our organisations. So one, that to me, there's an inescapable truth in this, that as individual organisations, we can't trade out of the current situation by ourselves. So collaboration is the only way we can survive, thrive, develop, is through collaborative advantage. I think that's got to be a given, certainly in a post-COVID environment. So why is it necessary to evaluate the extent of that collaboration? Well, I think that sits the messages firmly within organisations who are not used to collaborating in that sense. It permeates the message all through an organisation where it needs to be by focusing attention on it, by measuring it, by evaluating its stretch and capability. So I thought it was a really interesting question and kind of coming at it from a number of different angles. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Andy. We've got 1 minute left. I just want to say to everyone that the whole session's recorded, all the individual videos will be available, everything will be on the platform for the conference when we've done post-production, and we'll put stuff up next week. So all of this is available, and we're going to keep a copy of all the questions. I'm going to make sure that everybody on the panel gets the questions and the comments, because I think it's really valuable. Very quickly, the youth work stuff, there's a framework was developed from work that went out across 4 countries with about, I can't remember if it's about 800 responses, and that made recommendations back to NHS England, and one of them is the absolute requirement for a young person's voice to be part of the design. So just answering that work, those comments. Sam, I'm just going to hand back over to you to sort of wrap us up. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, a fantastic session. I think leads us all the need to go away and think quite deeply about what collaboration, diversity really means. Again, to James, Ian and Nick for stirring all those thoughts in all of us and reminding us about what is the core values of social prescribing. Thank you so much.